Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry for keeping you waiting. We had some technical difficulties. Alhamdulillah, now we're back. Inshallah, we will start the session right away. Okay, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammadin Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So first of all, thank you so much for joining the webinar, Back to Basics. Inshallah, throughout this series, we will try to get into some of the basics of Islamic finance in terms of concepts, in terms of the methodologies and everything. And we hope, inshallah, this will give us a brief understanding of what Islamic finance is all about. Okay, so let's start with when we talk about when we ask what is Islamic finance, what actually comes to our mind? I guess in most cases, we mention or we think that Islamic finance is basically an interest-free finance, or when we say Islamic finance, it's just we think about interest. We think about Riba. By the way, are you hearing us properly? Please comment if you are having any issues in terms of technical issues, or if the voice is not clear, right? So when we talk about Islamic finance, we talk about either Riba, or we feel that maybe this is only for Muslims, right? And to some extent, some would also feel that Islamic finance means na'uzubillah, some finance for some bad people, na'uzubillah, right? However, what we will try to say here, or we will try to elaborate here, is that Islamic finance is beyond just basic being interest-free. Yes, interest-free is one of the many components of Islamic finance, and it's not only for Muslims, it's also for non-Muslims. We will get into those questions, inshallah. Right, so first, the very first slide which I will try to bring here is basically the difference between the three most common economic practices: Islamic economic system, capitalism, and socialism. So we'll see that there are fundamental differences in terms of objective, in terms of the laws and governance, ownership rights, factors of production, how the money is perceived, and then about the creation and distribution of wealth. Now, when it comes to objective, Islamic economic system, the fundamental objective is to achieve justice. To achieve justice. Justice in Arabic means adl, to achieve adl. And maybe we can define adl in a manner is just to give everyone their proper right. The right, it may not be equal, but it is proper. We are not giving someone more than the right he deserves, not below than the amount that he deserves. When it comes to capitalism and socialism, the fundamental objective differs a lot. For capitalism, is basically profit maximization, and we will see that this objective basically determines and rules many other aspects of the finance itself. When it comes to laws and governance, Islamic economic system, as we all know, it is governed by the divine revelations, Al-Qur'an, the Wahi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent to his beloved messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And furthermore, we will inshallah discuss that as well. Furthermore, the practices, the pronouncement of our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the verbal announcements as well, the acknowledgements, the recognitions, also, which are all combined as sunnah. These are the laws and governance. Ultimately, this is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? However, in capitalism and socialism, it is laws made by human beings. So it is subject to change whenever there is a change in the society. However, by the way, what I mean by that is that it's not that the laws and governance of Shariah or Islamic divine revelations, it is not dynamic. It is dynamic, but the fundamentals, the very fundamentals which we will go through today, inshallah, are unchangeable. So after that, of course, with the circumstances, with the period, the era we go through, there will be changes, inshallah. In terms of ownership rights, when it comes to Islamic economic system, the ownership right, the ownership or the property rights is perceived as trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything ultimately belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lillahi ma fi samawati wa ma fil ard. Whatever there is between the heavens and the earth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he has the ultimate ownership. He has the ultimate property right. What we have is amana, is a trust. A trust given to a trustee has conditions, has limitations. We don't have absolute property right. We don't have absolute ownership. The ownership that we are given are limited and conditioned by the conditions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has put forth, which we will be discussing inshallah. In contrast, capitalism gives an absolute and unconditional ownership to private properties, whereby in socialism, it's difficult to have private property ownership at all, and the state owns basically everything. So we can see that Islamic economic ownership right and property right is in between. So we have on one hand, one extreme that you absolutely own everything. On the other hand, we have another extreme that you don't own anything. The state owns everything. So between the two is Islamic ownership right. We own, but our ownership is not absolute. It is conditioned, it is limited by the limitations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put forth. When it comes to the factors of property production, if we look at capitalism and socialism, let's look at capitalism as that's what prevailing in our economies and societies today. So we see that land, of course, land will own a rent, labor will own a wages, capital, which is money, which is not mixed with the entrepreneurship, which doesn't assume the risk, right? Underlying risk of the business, that earns an interest, right? So this is a significant difference. When it comes to Islamic finance, land owns rent, fine. Labor owns wages, fine. But capital, it has to mix with entrepreneurship. It has to undergo with the risk of the business, the risk sharing principles, and then it will earn a profit. A profit and interest, there is a fundamental difference. Interest is fixed. Whether or not the business is profitable, still you have to pay. Profit is only when the business earns a profit. So there is a share of profit when the business has a profit. If the business goes through a loss, the loss will be borne by the capital providers proportionately, unless there is a negligence on the entrepreneur's end, which we will be inshallah further elaborating in our sessions on the structures. So, so this is the difference between the factors of production. Then when it comes to the nature of money, in Islam, in Islamic economy, money is just perceived as a medium of exchange, a store of value, meaning the fundamentals of a medium of exchange. However, it's not a commodity itself. It's not something that we will buy and sell itself, right? It's a medium of exchange through which we will get to another usable property or asset, which we will be consuming, but not itself. Money we cannot consume. However, in both capitalism and socialism, what we will find is that money itself is a tradable commodity. You can trade it, you can buy and sell it. Now, when we want to have the fundamental characteristic of money, that it will be a medium of exchange, then we have to ban it from being tradable, right? If we don't put a ban on that, this is where the inflation comes in. This is where you have a lot of other issues in the economy. So this is why we see in Al-Quran, we will further go around and we will see that even about riba, when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he mentioned a hadith about riba, he actually prohibited barter trades of certain commodities, which includes, for example, salt, dates, then for example, gold, silver. So there were 6 types of commodities where our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited trading them in exchange of similar goods without being a spot delivery or without selling at par value. Why he did that, we will go through inshallah in the next few slides. One of the reasons was that those commodities were also used as a money, as a medium of exchange in those days. So even through that, so that the riba or the interest earning part or the tradability of the money itself doesn't come in. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam even imposed a restriction on that. We will go through it inshallah in the next few slides. Okay, the last part, which is in this slide, is the creation and distribution of wealth. Now, in Islamic economy, the creation of wealth will be according to Islam. The distribution of wealth will also be according to Islam, according to the Sharia. However, when it comes to conventional economy like capitalism, it is at the will of the owner. He has the ultimate absolute ownership to create and distribute as per his will. And in contrast, in socialism, it is all about the state. The state can create, can distribute at whatever its will. Now, when it comes to Islamic economy, either the user is or the owner is an individual or the state or whoever. Every time, everywhere, it will be governed by the principles of Sharia. All right. So let's go to the next part. Okay. Now, for Islamic finance, let's go through the features and ethical foundations. The first I will go through is the ethical foundations of Islamic finance. Now, Islamic finance is based on the principle of justice, as I mentioned in the previous slide as well, that the objective is to achieve justice. Now, this justice or this Adl is one of the main core ethical foundation of Islamic finance. It is also accomplished by Ihsaan. So Adl is the state or any way to do something which is considered usually is done in a proper manner. For example, to do something in a way that is usually considered by the society or community that it is done in an appropriate manner. And Ihsaan is the state, usually we translate it to excellence. So Ihsaan is a state that given the circumstances, given the resources, time, energy, and money, given the hindrances that we have or limitations we have, the thing or the task cannot be done better. That state is the Ihsaan. Now, IOFI has done a good thing, a very good thing. They have come up with an equation of Adl and Ihsaan, which I brought here deliberately so that, we can, this really is a beauty of Islamic finance, because the fundamental concept is exactly the same. So what IOFI said in its code of ethics is that Adl and Ihsaan can be further explained by an equation of 4 things. Number 1, having the right intention and the right mindset. Number 2, doing the right thing. Number 3, doing it in the right manner. And number 4, engaging with others positively. So those 4 components form the equation of Adl and Ihsaan, which is the ethical foundation of Islamic finance. Now, to achieve those 4 elements of the equation, we need 6 principles. I haven't brought this in this slide, but those 6 principles are those 6 virtues, IOFI call it. We can find it in details in IOFI code of ethics, which are basically taqwa and tawakkul. We know taqwa is the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawakkul is the dependence or reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgetting about what will be the outcome, rather putting all our energy, time, energy, and money properly in a proper manner on any task that we are given, and not becoming frustrated, for example. Then doing the right thing will be sidq and amana, doing in the right manner. So there will be sidq, amana, taqwa, tawakkul, sidq, amana, quwwa, and tawasi bil haqq. So those 6 virtues and principles accomplish Adl and Ihsaan, or the 4 elements of the equation. And then Adl and Ihsaan is the fundamental brick of ethical values of Islamic finance. So I brought this here so that you can go back, inshallah, and look at IOFI Code of Ethics. It's freely available in iofi.com, IOFI's official website, and you can download it. And it's a very good manual for every Muslim in general, and any practitioner or academician in Islamic finance in particular. All right, now let's go back. We were talking about what is Islamic finance, right? So we talked about the fundamental differences with other economies. We also talked about the fundamental ethical values. Now, the very basic thing, again, when we say what is Islamic finance, so the part Islamic is the one that rules the other part, the finance part. So it's a provision of financial services that are provided in accordance with Islamic Sharia. In accordance with Islamic Sharia. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is for the Muslims. What it means is that it has to comply with the Islamic Sharia or Islamic law. However, it is open. It is open for everyone, for Muslims and non-Muslims. Is basically, what is Islamic Sharia, by the way? Islamic Sharia or Sharia is the Islamic law. It provides ultimate guidance in terms of our beliefs, moral conduct, practical rulings or laws, and it basically addresses almost every aspect of our life. It governs our life. It governs the philosophy of our life, including personal, social, economic, and political spheres. So this is Sharia, and Sharia is the backbone of Islamic finance, the part Islamic, right? So Sharia governs the Islamic finance. Now, a bit more about Sharia, that when it comes to Sharia, sources of Sharia, there are two sources, two types of sources, primary and secondary. Primary sources are basically Qur'an and Sunnah. Qur'an, as we know, it was revealed upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Sunnah is basically his sayings, his practices, his recognitions, and even in some cases, the practices of his companions, ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in as well. So those two are the primary sources of Sharia. What it means is that whenever there is a Sharia ruling, usually those are primarily derived from Quran and Sunnah. But we know that not everything has been mentioned in Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah in many cases just provide us the guidance, the principal rulings. However, with circumstances being changed, with new era being coming in, there are many more difficult or different types of situations are coming in, and we have to derive the rulings from Quran and Sunnah, right? So this is where comes the secondary sources, which are primarily Ijma and Qiyas. Ijma is basically a kind of agreement among scholars from different times, from different locations. They didn't come to a conference and agreed all together. It wasn't like that. It was a unanimous agreement. Maybe someone from Kufa, someone from Medina, someone from Mecca. The scholars' opinion somehow got agreed upon in one single opinion. So this is where they consider ijma. And then qiyas is basically a type of analogy. Usually a new ruling has to be derived, and we have some sort of similarity in another ruling found in the primary sources. So this is how scholars would come and do their analogy. Now this ijma and qiyas has an element of ijtihad. Ijtihad is to derive the rulings of the new circumstances from the primary sources. Now, after deriving those rulings, maybe there will be an agreement among the scholars, maybe contemporary scholars. So this is where ijma happens, or maybe it doesn't happen. So this is where usually qiyas happens. There are a few other different types of terminologies we will find in books of scholars. Basically, ultimately, those are similar in nature. Anyway, the key message in this slide is that the sources of Sharia, even though primarily are Quran and Sunnah, but as I mentioned before as well, that Sharia is dynamic. As long as the fundamental principles are upheld, the ultimate ruling usually could be different or maybe slightly different from era to era. And this is where the beauty of Sharia scholars, the mujtahideen, the ones who derive the rulings from Quran and Sunnah comes in. Okay, now this slide shows some of the primary basic types of Sharia rulings. So we may heard most of it, so we may heard few of it, but no worries. Let's just go through. So haram we know haram is prohibited, right? It's well known. Then we know halal, but you don't find halal here. So halal is not only basically one category. Halal, there are multiple categories or subcategories inside halal. So we have makruh. Makruh is allowed, but it is disfavored. It is not favored. Mubah, which is neutral. It's not favored, it's not disfavored. We have mustahab, which is halal, but also favored. We have masnoon, which is a bit strongly favored. Then we have wajib, which is almost obligatory. We have fard, which is fully obligatory. Now, there are differences in different schools of fiqh. Some would call it, for example, some wouldn't have fard, they would only have wajib. By wajib they mean it's a synonym of fard, for example. Then in some cases maybe we will have nawafil or nafal, which is maybe similar to mubah. But that doesn't, I mean, those differences are not major, those differences are minor. But the key message in this slide is that only the haram is the haram category or prohibited. Other than that, all the 5 subcategories, 6 subcategories we see in this slide are halal. So we can see that basically haram are only few. Halal is many, countless. And there is a very good legal maxim. I mean, usually we use when it comes to deriving the rulings of contemporary financial things or anything related to fiqh mu'amalat, that al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha. The basic principle in anything is al-ibaha, for it to be mubah, meaning that it is permissible. Mubah means permissible. It's not favored, not disfavored, but it's permissible. That is the very basic principle. So it's not that for anything to prove that it is permissible or not, we have to see if there is any narration which says it is permissible. It's not like that. Rather, it's opposite. We will have to see if there is anything that is impermissible. If there is riba, for example, if there is qimar, for example, if there is maisir, for example. So from this, you can understand that basically Sharia is like a filter. Sharia doesn't come and innovate and dictate, say, okay, this is the only type of business you can do. Khalas. No, it's not like that. Sharia is like a filter. It will filter out impurities. It will filter out prohibited things. It will filter out things that are not permissible. But after the filtering, the rest are okay. So there is countless ways and for rooms for innovations. It's not that Sharia is putting, kind of blockade in terms of innovations. It's not like that. So hope it's clear, alhamdulillah. Now, this slide showcases some of the philosophical foundations when it comes to Islamic finance. So it's Islamic finance is Sharia. And of course, when it comes to Sharia, we have very basic fundamental beliefs. For example, we believe on the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But bear in mind, these philosophical foundations are what dictate the moral values and fundamentals of Islamic finance. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the ones who deal with Islamic finance has to believe in those beliefs. So in other words, it is well, approachable, or it can be well approached and well dealt with when it comes to dealing with non-Muslims. No issue at all. In fact, Islam came as a rahmah, as a blessing to the whole mankind, to the whole humanity. So there shouldn't be any question or any doubt about that. So these are few fundamental beliefs that a Muslim usually believe, and how it aligns with Islamic finances. For example, the principle of Tawheed, that Allah is one. So with that, we know that there are the limitations that is imposed on Islamic finance. It's actually a form of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not it's not a sort of barrier, rather it's a form of submission. Then, for example, Rububiyyah would say that, okay, every rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even though we see no opportunity, for example, in halal, but we see more opportunity in haram, still we have to do sabr. Still we have to be patient, because rizq is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we are adhering to the rules He has imposed on us, definitely rizq will come. We don't have to worry about. Risala, for example, the belief in faith in Risala means that we believe in the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It means that whatever he has dictated us, he has instructed us, prohibited us, we have to follow those when it comes to even Islamic finance. Akhirah, accountability during the day of judgment. This is a very, very basic principle which dictates an overall philosophy of a Muslim. We know, for example, Sayyidina Amirul Mu'minin Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, the second caliph of Islam, he used to say, Hasibu qabla an tuhasabu, account yourself, hold yourself accountable before you are held accountable during the day of judgment. So we as Muslims should always bear in mind that I'm being watched. Whatever I'm doing, I'm being watched. However, I'm dealing with my customers, I'm doing a fraud or whatever, I am being watched by someone who will hold me accountable during the day of judgment. So whenever a Muslim has that belief of accountability, it actually dictates everything. Either I am in front of the CC camera or IP camera, or I am in a secret place, nobody is watching me, only myself, I always know that somebody is behind who is watching me, right, on top of it. So then we have istikhlaf. Istikhlaf is basically the duty of care that we as a human being have on this earth. Allah has made us Khalifa. And then tazkiyah is purification. Kafala is social solidarity. So whatever we do, we have to We have to bear in mind that we are basically here to, enhance the social solidarity. Then Adala, we already discussed. Falah, which is basically the well-being of success in this world and the hereafter. So those are basically philosophical foundation of Islamic finance. Now let's go to the characteristics of Islamic finance. Very briefly, there are three main characteristics of Islamic finance. Number one, risk sharing. So there is a very basic legal maxim which says there is no risk, there is no return without risk or liability. So whatever we do, for example, in Islamic finance, there are partnership contracts, which we will be discussing in the next session, inshallah. So in a partnership contract, a capital provider, he provides capital, but he takes the risk, right? The risk of the underlying business. So because of the risk he is taking, he is entitled to a share in the profit. Similarly, when a seller sells a commodity, when a seller or maybe a landowner rents his property, so he is taking the risk of, if it's a lease contract, he is taking the risk of depreciation, for example, in the pricing, risk of damaging the property itself. Because of that risk, he is earning a rent. In a sale contract, a seller is, once he is possessing the goods from another seller or the vendor or whatever, and then he is selling to another party, he is taking the risk during the transition from his purchasing to until the selling to other person. He is taking a risk. With the risk of the underlying asset, he is deserving a profit. So in other words, in Islamic finance, one of the beauty is that it's the risk sharing concept. Then the second one, which is very important, is connection with real economy. This is one single beauty of Islamic finance. In Islamic finance, there is no room for contracts or transactions without any underlying assets. So every time, for example, if you go to Islamic banks, you need money to purchase a car, for example. You cannot just get money without anything. The Islamic bank will, of course, purchase the car for you and then sell to you, for example, if it's a murabaha contract, or maybe purchase the car and then lease to you if it's a ijara contract. If it's a house, there will be a diminishing musharaka contract, whereby the bank would purchase together with you and have a joint ownership over the property, and then gradually you will be owning the property 100%. So in other words, every transaction that an Islamic finance will uphold is basically connected with real economy. There is a very direct relationship with the real economy. Now, there could be a question, like one can argue that we don't see that today in Islamic banks. We have to bear in mind that the Islamic banking institutions and financial institutions that we see today have just emerged like maybe around 50, 60 years. Before that, for a long time, Muslims were not so much attached to the economic pictures because of many things. I don't want to go there. So there is a lot of room to improve. Maybe we are not in the very ideal stage, but those are the characteristics of Islamic finance. Once we know them, inshallah, we will try our best to uphold them and get the true outcome of Islamic finance. Now, the third most important component is that Sharia compliance. Now, Sharia compliance would mean, firstly, the negative. There are some negative screening, meaning that we have to ensure this is not there. We have to ensure this is not there. We have to ensure this is not there. And there would be also some good virtues, like we want to achieve some maqasid Sharia, some objective of Sharia. We will go through it, inshallah. Okay, the first one, when it comes to prohibitions, basic prohibitions, the first one is riba. Second one is gharar, or excessive uncertainty. Third one, maisir, or gambling. And fourth, there are some non-permissible or haram goods and services. We will go through it, inshallah. Now let's come to the first one, riba. Riba, we know, we heard about it a lot, right? When it comes to Islamic finance, the first thing comes in mind that there is no riba, or there is no interest. Now, riba literally means to grow, to increase, to multiply. And contractually, it is an increase on lent money. When I lend money to someone, and I have a contract, I have a pre-agreement that there will be an increase when it comes to payout, when it comes to the payment of the lent money. This is what riba is. Now, it would also include all forms of interest, usually, or maybe increase or decreases in exchange contracts of commodities having similar characteristics. The last part basically is riba al-fadl. We will discuss it shortly. So in other words, we can say that riba is any conditional access in a loan over and above the principal. So in a loan, now loan can be just a loan contract. It can be a debt, again, a debt payable as well, against maybe a sale contract or whatever. So in exchange of the payable, in exchange in against the payable, anything which is conditionally made as an excess over and above the principal would be considered a riba. Now we can have countless examples for them. For this, for example, when it comes to conventional banking, the interest that is provided to the bank account holder, depositor, because the depositor basically loans to the bank. There is no other way to justify it, but it's a loan. And then in against the loan, the bank gives certain interest, for example. Similarly, on the financing side, borrower comes to the bank, he needs money for personal financing or whatever, and the bank lends the money to the borrower. And in exchange of that loan, the borrower has to pay an interest. So this is all forms and examples of riba. Then we have insurance, also a form of riba. There are many other ways actually when it comes to riba. Inshallah, we will discuss briefly in our sessions. Now this is interesting. Riba, the prohibition of riba came through stages. The very first verse was revealed in Mecca at around 619 AD. And in this verse, you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, okay, whenever you pay as an interest so that it may increase the wealth of people, it actually does not increase in the sight of Allah. So he's not saying it's prohibited. He's saying that you think it is increasing, riba increasing, interest increases your wealth, but it's not in actuality. In actuality, riba doesn't increase your wealth in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you see the first verse, it just shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving a hint that what you are thinking is not actual, is not practical. Now in the second verse, which was revealed after Hijrah, 2 years after Hijrah, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying very explicitly, do not swallow interest. Doubled and redoubled, adha'afa mudha'afa. So he is saying here, do not swallow interest, adha'afa mudha'afa. This is not a condition, but a reality. Basically, riba usually was in terms of usury, in terms of adha'afa mudha'afa. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that. But the point is, Allah mentioned that do not swallow interest and doubled and redoubled. Then in the third verse, Allah mentioned, he actually gave an example of some other tribe, and he was mentioning that for their taking interest, which had been prohibited to them. So he was mentioning about, I forgot, maybe most probably it was about Yahud. So he was mentioning about them, and he was mentioning that interest was prohibited for them. So still, I mean, it was not so clear. The previous verse, it was a bit clear, but it was not detailed. And then in the fourth verse, which was revealed in the 8th Hijrah, especially after the victory of Makkah, here we see, this is the longest paragraph of verses from verse 275 to 281 in Surah Al-Baqarah. We see several things. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here, Allah has permitted sale and prohibited riba, right? So this is one. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions Allah destroys riba and nourishes charities. Yamhaqullahu riba wa yurbi sadaqat. Then he further mentions, O who believer, fear Allah and give up what still remains of riba if you are believers. But if you do not give up, then listen to the declaration of war from Allah and His Messenger. So this was the very profound caution and message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against the ones who is still consuming riba even after the prohibition. That to announce, declare a war against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His beloved Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Allah is our Lord and Creator, and if we are announcing war against Him and His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, na'udhu billah, it's going to be unimaginable. So this is the strongest caution, I would say, a warning given in Al-Quran Kareem for any sin. It was the most strongest. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us against riba. Then in hadith also, our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there are several hadiths which mentions. One hadith, for example, which says, it was narrated by Jabir radhiyallahu anhu, The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam la'ana akil riba wa mukilahu wa shahidayhi wa katibahu, that he cursed the receiver and the payer of riba, and also the ones who record and the ones record it or write it, and also the witnesses of the transaction, meaning that anyone related to riba directly is cursed. Then in another hadith, on the night of Mi'raj, we know that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was called by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the night of Isra and Mi'raj, and there he saw in Jahannam some people whose stomachs with what were like houses with snakes visible from the outside. And he asked Jibril, who were they? And Jibril alayhi salam replied that they were the people who had received riba. So there are many other hadiths as well, which collectively, which echoes the same message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in Al-Quran Kareem, that it is prohibited, and not only prohibited, it's actually a grief sin. Now, before I go to the types of riba, I think let's, okay, all right, no problem. So the types of riba, I think we are almost about to end the session today. I had some more slides, but no problem. I will end, inshallah, after riba and take your questions. Okay, so in terms of types of riba, so there are basically two types that the scholars have mentioned. The first one is riba al-nasi'a. Nasi'a is basically a deferment, kind of debt. So riba al-nasi'a means riba against deferment. Well, now deferment of what? Deferment of maybe price of a sale contract, or deferment of loan. So this is exactly the riba that has been prohibited in Al-Quran Kareem. So this is why this is also named as riba al-Quran. Now there is another type of riba, which is riba al-fadl. This is what was mentioned in a hadith. For example, take this hadith, Abu Sa'id Khudri radiallahu anh, he mentioned that gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt. These all commodities should be like for like, mithlan bi mithlin, hand to hand, yadan bi yadin, meaning it has to be when you are exchanging in same group and kind, it has to be delivered on spot, and it has to be equal in quantity. Whoever pays or takes more has indulged in riba. If someone gives more or takes more, both will be involved in riba. Now this is what I was mentioning earlier, that in riba al-fadl, if we look at that, if we are exchanging in the same group and kind of commodities, then there are two conditions based on the hadith. Both commodities must be exactly equivalent. There must be spot delivery. For example, gold against gold, we are exchanging gold by gold. 100 grams of gold, 100 grams of gold to be delivered on spot. Both counter values delivered on spot. If we are exchanging 100 grams of gold against 110 grams of gold, then it is riba. If we are exchanging 100 grams of gold again with 100 grams of gold, but this 100 grams of gold will be paid maybe 1 week later, meaning it's deferred, it's not a spot, still it's riba. If it is of same group but different kind, for example, all currencies today, all the currencies that we see, the US dollar, maybe Malaysian ringgit, right? Saudi dinar, all are considered as same group but different kind, different currency. So if we are exchanging with same currency, $100 again $100, dollars again dollars, then we have to have equal amount and spot, both two conditions as mentioned in the first point. But if it is a different kind, dollar against dinar, dollar against riyal, sorry, I mentioned previously Saudi dinar, it should be Saudi riyal, then dollar against ringgit, for example, then the one condition should be there, it has to be spot delivered. So meaning that we cannot do forward contract, we cannot do futures with currencies, we cannot do forward and futures with golds, for example. So those are the fundamental rulings of riba al-fadl. If the commodity is exchanged with different group altogether, gold for salt, for example, or dates for silver, for example, then we don't have to adhere to any of the conditions mentioned in this line. But anyway, the fundamental message in this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited riba. This is the very basic prohibition. And this has to be adhered at all times when it comes to Islamic finance, when we structure the contracts, when we structure the products, etc. The second one is gharar. I think I can do gharar as well today. Let's do it, inshallah. Now, gharar literally means ambiguity, uncertainty, something missing in a contract, in a price, in a forms of contract, maybe in the subject matter, maybe an important information is missing. Like for example, we are purchasing a computer, but how much RAM is there is missing. Maybe a mobile, how much is the size of the ROM? We don't know. So those important information is basically is what determines the decision-making process of a consumer, of a customer. So without this information, it may arise to dispute. It may lead to unhappiness or dissatisfaction between the two contractual parties, which are all what Islamic fiqh muamalat or the ruling, fiqh of transactions we don't want to do. What we want to achieve is taradi. Taradi meaning satisfaction of both parties in the contract. Now, of course, the satisfaction will be based on negotiation. We cannot ensure that the person buying is always happy. The happiness will be converted or seen through the negotiation that we do. But what we can determine is, was all the information passed in transparency? Was there any information asymmetry which compelled one of the parties to take decision based on some uninformed thing or something? So these are the things we can control, and this is what we want to do with controlling gharar. Now, sometimes we will see extreme uncertainty that also will be considered as gharar. I will see that, inshallah. Okay. Now, gharar, to consider something as gharar, there are 4 conditions. There could be no transparency for something. There could be missing information. There could be ambiguity in many cases. But does all those are considered as gharar or not? So we have 4 conditions. Based on which we will decide it's a gharar, meaning that a gharar which in most cases void the contract, nullify the contract. Is it in that level or not? It will be determined by 4 conditions. Number 1, we have to see if that ambiguity is involved in an exchange contract or it's, for example, in a charity contract. Exchange contract, exchange-based contract, for example, partnership contracts, sale contracts, lease contracts, where both parties are exchanging some counter values, right? Charity contracts, for example, hiba, gift, for example, maybe kafala or something where the other party is not supposed to provide any counter value. So if this is an exchange contract and the gharar is there, ambiguity is there, then yes, it's a gharar. Of course, further to the next three points. The second point is we have to see the degree of the uncertainty or ambiguity. If it is minor, then it's forgiven. It's fine. If it's a material gharar, as I mentioned, a very important information based on which decisions are taken, then it's a considerable gharar. Number 3, we have to see the ambiguity relates to what. If it relates to the primary object or the primary subject matter of the contract, then yes, it's a considerable gharar. It's something that could void the contract. And finally, we have to see that what was the justification behind this gharar. Sometimes there could be gharar, but still it's forgiven because Shariah scholars would see after their research and understanding the situation, everything, that is a necessity which is recognized by Sharia. So in such necessities, Sharia may allow some sort of gharar, which it may not allow in normal circumstances. Anyway, so based on those 4 conditions, we can decide, or we can consider a gharar a real gharar, meaning that a gharar which is really a problem, we have to take that with care. We have to minimize the gharar to save the contract. Now let's go through some of the circumstances of gharar. We see that, for example, there are gharar in the form of contract. Some hadith mentions, for example, when you combine 2 sales in one, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade 2 sales in one. How you do that? For example, I sell you something in the condition that you sell me something else. So when the two sales are conditional to each other, this is a form of gharar. This is a form of gharar in the form of contract. A contract contingent on a future event. For example, I'm saying, okay, I sell you this based on what? If there is a rain, for example, or if certain things happen, if someone else gets married. So this is contingent on a future event which may or may not happen. So this makes a gharar, brings a gharar in the form of contract. Then contract effective on a future event, for example, which I already mentioned, right? Then forward and futures, where both counter values are deferred. This is also a gharar. This is actually named by Kali bil Kali, and Sharia prohibits that. So in some cases, Sharia allows a price can be deferred, for example, in an installment sale, in a deferred payment sale. In some cases, Sharia allows the commodity or the subject matter itself to be deferred. For example, in a sale, salam is sale, in a istisna sale, which we will inshallah later discuss as well. But what if both counter values are deferred? Similar to what happens in a forward contract, similar to what happens in a futures contract. So this is gharar, and that's why it's prohibited. Similar to options, there are some options which are recognized by Sharia. But what about sales of options? When it comes to sale of options, a lot of times there are gharar, excessive gharar, and also recognized as prohibited by Sharia scholars. In terms of subject matter of the contract, there are multiple reasons because of which we can consider that there has been gharar. For example, I'm selling something which is not in existence, right? Sharia has given an exemption in salam and istisna contract. Salam is a forward contract whereby the commodity is delivered in a future date. Istisna is a manufacturing or construction contract whereby someone orders for something which is to be delivered at a future date. So in both cases, the subject matter is not existent during the contract, which is fine based on the conditions in the relevant chapters of salam and istisna. However, in other circumstances, normally something which is not in existent, it is a gharar, and because of this, the subject matter, the unexistence of the subject matter really defects the contract as well. Then not owned by the seller, selling something that the seller himself doesn't own, or not possessing it, either actual possession or contractual constructive possession, either physically possessing it or maybe possessing the documents or licenses through which he can possess anytime. So none of those are available. Maybe the commodity is in the ship delivering from another country, and then the seller is already selling to someone else. So until the ship is reaching the country, the port, the commodity is sold several hands, right? So this is why prices also increase. This is something there are gharar. Then finally, not specifying the subject matter in terms of quality, in terms of quantity. These are all gharar in the subject matter. I think I will stop here today. It's almost the time that we committed. We started a bit late. However, we will listen to your questions. I think we have some questions in our panel, in our chat boxes. Please ask the questions that you have. You can raise your hand, or you can put in the chat box. Let's go through some of the questions, and inshallah we will continue next week from the leftover of gharar, and then we will enter into the other prohibitions of Sharia. Finally, a bit on maqasid Sharia, and then we will enter into the contracts, inshallah. All right, I will just end this slide today for today. Yeah, this one. Okay. Yeah, there are a few brothers and sisters asking for the slides. Inshallah, the slides and the recording will be provided in due time. There are some Q&A again about the slide. Yes, the slides will be provided. My question is about ijma. You said that there are lots of scholars. If there is not any consistent or dispute between different scholars in different countries about one issue, what will happen? Okay, if there is not any consistent or dispute between different scholars in different countries about an issue, what will happen? I assume what you are asking is that what if there are multiple scholars in multiple countries and they have regarding an issue, they don't have any dispute, like everyone is agreeing to this, right? So will we call it an ijma or not? This is a bit ikhtilaf. There are some ikhtilaf in considering ijma in today's time, because some scholars would consider ijma only during the time of Sahaba, only during the time immediately after Sahaba, for example, during the time of Tabi'in. But after that, every time there is some faqih saying that there has been an ijma on this ruling, the next generation would say, no, there was no ijma. So there has been some differences of opinion. But regardless of that, theoretically saying, if it happens that scholars of different countries agree on something without any dispute, theoretically it should be considered ijma. You're right. Okay, will we be able to access the sessions later? Yeah, inshallah, we will be able to access. Salam Sheikh, a common question I believe is about riba involving in our financing of a purchase of house. Since there are no Islamic financing options in Singapore, what is your view on its permissibility? Yeah, thank you. Jazakallah khairan. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Okay, first thing is to acknowledge that riba is haram, and we have to try our best not to be involved in riba in any way we can. Now, this prohibition has been there, will be there until the day of judgment. This is the very first thing we need to understand and acknowledge. Secondly, when there is something haram and there is a necessity, the necessity is determined, of course, there are multiple variables, but one common thing is that necessity is when our life depends on it, like the life and death or such, extreme things are depending on it. If we don't obtain that, there could be a risk of injury or risk of death. This is how usually the scholars explain necessity. It's not like flexible, like any time we mention, okay, this is necessity. No, it has been of course determined by conditions, and it was also limited, like necessity gives us some easiness, some permissibility, but of course it is also limited by the condition of necessity, by how much we need to relieve that necessity. So having said that, a country where we don't have options, right? So first thing is best to ask scholars of your country, because they might have different opinion based on the circumstances they go through. But if you ask me, what I would say, I would recommend is that as a Muslim, we try our best, maybe through friends and families, to form up some sort of Islamic finance community, so that we can finance each other, we can finance together, but still try to refrain ourselves from any riba-based financing, because this is something for this sin, for this one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to declare war against him. This is so powerful. Whenever I think about it, I really get, very, very difficult feeling. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from this. Let's try, inshallah. Try your best. Consult your local scholars. Inshallah, you will find a way. There is a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Whoever strives to be on our path, on my path, I open them for them, ways, several ways. Subulana. Subul is the plural of sabil, like hundreds of ways, thousands of ways we cannot even imagine of. So inshallah, if you are trying your best, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open your doors, inshallah. Okay, Jazakallah khairan. There is another question. Is ihsan same as efficiency in contemporary economics, excluding all harams? It's actually more than efficiency. Ihsan is excellence. Again, it's better if you go through the IOFI Code of Ethics. Inshallah, you'll find some very good explanation there. But to summarize, given the circumstances one has, given the limitations one has, one is doing something in the very best manner. So you cannot do better than that, given the circumstances, given the resources, given the limitations. That's what ihsan is. It includes efficiency, but it's more than efficiency. Jazakallah. Okay, I have another question, like a lot of questions. Jazakumullah khairan. I think we will have to stop at some point. We will try to answer the remaining questions if there is something unanswered, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. If a person's pension fund has been generating interest, but he or she cannot control this, what do we do with this riba? And are we sinful for this? Okay, this is an interesting question. For pension fund, uh, there are multiple, different views of scholars. One view says like when the pension fund is deducted before it is entering my bank account, before it is entering my possession, and the pension fund is generating, growing based on riba or whatever. So some group of scholars would consider that it is, since it hasn't entered my possession, I have no responsibility of the underlying, what's happening underlying later on, right? And then once at a time of retirement, or I'm getting that as a gratuity or something, it's like a hiba, it's like a gift I'm getting. So I don't have to worry about the riba that is procuring. But for others, and I myself also view the view that when I'm knowing that this money is entering interest, then the safest for me would be just to forego the interest part. Of course, the principle is halal, no issue, but the interest part becomes doubtful. Jazakallah khairan. Will we be able to? Okay, I think I have answered the questions here. Now there are some questions in the chat box. I think just a couple of it I will take. Assalamu alaikum. Could you please explain the existence of gharar in two sales in one contract? Can it still be gharar if all the subject matter and deliverability is made clear? What's the difference between this type of contract and barter system? Okay, Jazakallah. Two sales in one sale is basically when we combine contracts, making it conditional to each other, and without considering the underlying requirements of each contract separately. So our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam specifically mentioned about two sale in one sale. So we cannot combine two sales in any way. For example, I'm saying that I'm selling you my car, and then condition is you sell your house to me. So these two sales cannot be conditional in one another. This is one form. Then scholars have further extended this ruling to sale and ijara, sale and lease, meaning that I cannot say, okay, I sell you my car, in exchange that or conditional to this is that you rent your house to me, you rent your land to me. Those are the two very basic examples which are right in the hadith. Now, other than that, when it comes to combination of contracts, right? So if the contracts are not conditional to each other, if the contracts when combined together do not lead to a riba, then it's fine. No issue, right? There are Sharia standards. For example, IOFI has the Sharia standard on combination of contracts. You can look into it for further reading. Barter system is a different one. Barter system is when one is selling another or one is purchasing from the other, and both the counter values are commodities. It's actually one sale. It's not two sales. It's one sale, but in both counter value you have commodity. You don't have money or or currency in one hand. So that's fine. That's a different thing, unless it violates the conditions of riba al-fazl, for example, meaning that it is of same kind and group, but we are selling not on a spot, we are selling with not equal in proportion, then it will be riba. That's a different discussion. Okay, I think one last question for today, inshallah. May I know of your opinion on fatwa shopping on Islamic finance? Okay, fatwa shopping can be for good meaning as well. Like you are, you are looking for fatwa for you to get the best fatwa. That's fine, with the sincerity and ikhlas and of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. But looking for fatwas to find leeways and to play around the legal rulings of Sharia is something that is marked as very cautious thing by the Sharia scholars. Because when we start fatwa shopping, even in, let's say, fiqh muamalat, even in Islamic finance, financial things, but soon maybe shaitan will push us, whisper us that we go to ibadah. For example, we will try to find leeways and flexibilities when it comes to ibadah and salah and other ibadah as well, which is very dangerous, and that can even come to our iman, our faith. So may Allah Subhanahu wa Taala preserve our iman in all state until we leave this world. Ameen. So in general, to answer your question, fatwa shopping, just to understand more about it, is fine, but in the intention that one just tries to find a leeway or exit without really finding, wanting to find the best solution, is not something that scholars have favored for. Jazakallah khairan. I think I have to hard stop here. There are a few more questions. Inshallah, we will try to answer your questions by email or in our social medias. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much for participating in our session. We look forward in the next few sessions as well. We hope you will attend and join. And those who have missed part of this session because of prayer in some countries, inshallah, you will get the slides and also the recorded version of the webinar. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.